Funding for Georgia Outdoors has been made possible in part by grants from the Georgia Natural Resources Foundation, from the Imlay Foundation, and from viewers like you.
This is a show about invasive species, and while most invasive species don't look as frightening as this snake, they all have the ability to turn an ecosystem upside down. Along the coast of Georgia, huge red bay trees have stood as sentinels of the seaside landscape. But they are dying. Most are gone. They end up looking like this. That was a bay tree?
That was probably a bay tree there. You can see this whole spot with all these resprouts. It would have been covered.
Eamon Leonard with Georgia's Invasive Species Task Force says the trees are under attack by a tiny beetle. Weird thing about that, it isn't the beetle that actually kills the tree. So this would have been up on a tree and it ends up a stump like that. Just because this is what's hard to really believe. The beetle is not eating these leaves.
They're not, no. It's as if the leaves have starved from something. So the beetle, it's an ambrosia beetle, and it's actually a fungus farming beetle. It brings a fungus in its cheek, as like when we come to a new land, we bring our cattle and our crops. It's bringing this fungus so it can eat that later. So it's creating these galleries or channels within the tree, almost like caves, to inoculate with this fungus, almost like we do with mushroom farming.
So it's stuffing the tree with fungus?
With fungus, to grow and eat later. So it's eating that fungus as its food, not the tree. The tree is just the site where it's growing this fungus.
The beetle drills little holes throughout the tree and deposits the fungus inside. The tree cuts off sap when it detects the fungus and eventually starves itself to death. The beetles first arrived at Port Wentworth, Georgia in 2002, most likely on a shipping crate. But look how quickly the infestation spread. Now, Georgia's invader is also a problem in Florida. Ambrosia beetles in Florida's avocado groves have picked up the fungus and carry the disease now known as laurel wilt.
This side here has got that green wilt, and then back up at the top you see all the ends of the leaves are starting to turn purple, just hang down.
Don Pybus coordinates the fight to save more than 7,000 acres of avocados.
What I'm going to do is take a hatchet and try to remove a little bit of the bark, and we can see underneath the bark what's affecting the tissue of the tree. You can see the darker strains in here, especially where there are entry holes where the beetles have come in. You see that that's indicative of the laurel wilt fungus that's starting to spread into this tree.
All caused by an insect no bigger than a grain of rice.
That brown spot right here at the end of my finger, that's one of them. In particular, you'll see it here where the terminal buds and the limb here, this is starting to droop, hang down, and starting to, dry out.
Though growers are experimenting with fungicides, the only surefire way to stop the spread is to chop down the tree, kill the roots, and burn the stump. Otherwise, the fungus will just move down each row of trees. Florida has another problem that could impact our pocketbooks. Florida used this ad to get public attention because these giant snails were all over the place and they eat everything in sight. Look at this thing. It actually stares back at you. Can you see his mouth? That is huge. It does look like some science fiction. I mean, when he opens his mouth, this is like a science fiction giant snail. These snails have both male and female reproductive systems and lay thousands of eggs. Mark Hagan with Florida's Department of Agriculture says one pet owner cost them years of work by releasing just 3 snails.
And it took 4 years of searching and treatment to capture 18,000 from those 3 snails.
They are illegal in the United States, but people continue to sneak them in. Mark tells of one woman nabbed at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport with 12 snails under her dress. The snail may seem like a Florida issue, but it could hit many of us in the produce section of our grocery stores.
They eat over 500 different plants, including virtually everything we grow as food in the state of Florida. The nation depends on Florida for its food from October through May. So it could have a serious impact not just on Floridians, but on the entire nation. They're also a human and animal health threat in that CDC has confirmed the presence of Angiostrongylus cantonensis, which is rat lungworm disease, and that can lead to eosinophilic meningitis.
It is such a serious problem, the Agriculture Department sends out teams Monday through Friday, going through neighborhoods where snails have been spotted. They also eat concrete to get calcium for their shells. One snail down, thousands to go. Then there's this guy. Burmese pythons have invaded Everglades National Park. There are thousands in the Everglades. Now they're on the move, west and north, which is why we met up with Jeff Fobb in Homestead, Florida.
The biggest problem is that they're not going to stay in the Everglades. I mean, eventually their range will expand as the population grows.
Pythons are popular pets. An estimated 99,000 were imported to the United States between 1996 and 2006. But they grow fast, and researchers think pet owners dump them in the Everglades when they get too big to control. Take your baby and tell me about the snake.
One of the biggest problems with them is they eat just about anything that's warm-blooded. The only reptile I know of that they consume is alligators, crocodilians. So they have eaten a few alligators, and they can prey on anything they can overpower. Small birds, rodents, as they get bigger, they've even found bobcat claws in them, and that's a fairly powerful animal. They're incredibly powerful. Even this little guy is strong.
I just felt when I was holding him, I can feel the muscles.
So multiply this times 50, 100, and imagine how strong the animal is.
Jeff trains volunteers for the Python Patrol, a first response team formed by the Nature Conservancy. When pythons are spotted, people can call volunteers trained to capture them. Jeff gave me a quick lesson on how to wrangle a python. He made it look pretty easy.
You want to try it?
I'll give it a try.
He'll be right here. He's not much bigger.
He's bigger.
Yeah, he's a little bit.
You gave me a bigger one. He looks meaner. All right. The first attempt left me empty-handed. trying to press the rubber handle of a pole on the head of an angry snake doesn't seem like the smartest thing to do.
Back where you want to.
All right.
Right now.
Dang.
He's pretty strong. Push it down all the way down. Now, grab him. Way, way up. There you go.
Oh.
And the good thing is, now he's getting a little mad.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah. He's mad at me.
I don't know. I think he's kind of mad at me,
There you
too.
go.
All right.
Now, this is the strangest part. You're going to swap hands. People get really uncomfortable during that, at transition. Now, pull this bag over his head.
All right.
Now, pull this tight. Let go of his head. And he's gonna see how he's pushing down towards the bottom of that. And we're gonna give him some encouragement to get him to move into that.
Come on, buddy. You are strong. I'm shaking a little bit. That was nervous.
Yeah. Well, he tried to bite after you grabbed him.
I noticed.
But before that, he was content to leave us alone.
Yeah.
And then after you got a hold of him,
Yeah, I saw that. Biology professor Michael Dorcas spent years researching python activity in the Everglades. Because they eat everything from raccoons to deer, he's already seen an impact on nature's balance.
I know that in all the time that I've been going down to the Everglades since 2005, I have yet to see a raccoon in the southern part of the Everglades, either dead or alive. And I know that back in the 1990s and before, raccoons were a real problem in Everglades National Park because they would get into people's garbage and things like that. Here we have this large apex predator that's been introduced onto the North American continent. And at least based on our research, it appears that it's already caused major declines in some species of mammals that were once very common in South Florida.
Pythons come from Southeast Asia. The native habitat is similar to that of the Southeast. Michael wrote a book on the invasion and says pythons could make their way to the coastal Carolinas, Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia. Of particular concern is the possibility they will move into a crown jewel of the South, Okefenokee Swamp.
And these snakes, you know, in their native range are found in a variety of habitats. So I certainly would think that, you know, if the climate is suitable, there's no reason pythons couldn't persist in Okefenokee Swamp.
Once an invader makes its way in, stopping it can be all but impossible. It doesn't help that we sometimes have a love-hate relationship with invasives. For example, look at this shrimp next to a native one. These giants are showing up in waters off Georgia's coast. DNR biologist Todd Mathis has monitored their development.
They occur from North Carolina to Texas.
And they're not really native in any of those states, or are they?
They are not native in any of those states.
What country are they native?
Well, they're to Indonesia, South Pacific.
But shrimpers may say, what's not to love?
I know shrimpers that have made hundreds and hundreds of dollars on tiger shrimp this past year, selling them. But at what cost to our native white shrimp? That's the big question. And we just simply don't know right now. We just simply don't know.
And it's hard to tell what you're getting when they're small. They look the same.
Some of the interesting stuff is the very small tiger shrimp have not the bands going across, but they have a band that runs, a red stripe that runs along the top of the back. And so what we've theorized is that at some point in time they molt and they lose that stripe that's along the back and they have the more traditional banding.
I mean, it's a pretty shrimp.
It's a very pretty shrimp.
So you're telling me it gets like,
Yes.
wow.
Yes.
That's like a lobster.
Yes.
And then what you would do is you would split it down the middle and open it up and then,
Right.
and then bake it or broil it.
But tiger shrimp are predatory and may eat the smaller native species, fish larvae, or other things important to the ecosystem. That is the trouble with invasives. By the time we find out if this is a problem, it will be too late to turn back the clock. Like the Cuban tree frog, often kept as a house pet. He looks pretty harmless.
I mean, he's a tree frog, but if you can tell, he's kind of warty for a tree frog. Whoop! He's on your hat. Let's try that again.
You know what's funny? I saw him looking at my hat.
It's like, I want to go there.
Up close, you can see the warts, and he resembles a toad more than a frog. Trouble is, when set free, this charming little hat lover eats native frogs. A lot of them.
So what's so bad about this little guy? He looks harmless.
He does look kind of cute, and he is used as a house pet sometimes, but he's very carnivorous. He'll eat other tree frogs, he'll eat snakes, he'll eat lizards.
Snakes?
He'll eat little snakes, yeah. So in some areas where he's found, anecdotally, people said they've heard and seen less of our native tree frogs.
Wow.
Because he's eating them.
Whoa!
That feisty behavior is why a lot of anglers put their boats in the water at the Wayne County Catfish Tournament in Jessup, Georgia. Most folks would love to catch this big boy. It may be an invasive. It eats native fish. But Geraldine Bennett speaks for many when she sings the praises of the flathead catfish.
How hard do flatheads fight?
Oh, they fight pretty hard. They do.
Does it bug you that they eat native fish, or do you care? You just like them?
I just like them. I like to catch them.
And you eat them?
I do. I do. My whole family does.
It is one of the most popular fish on the Ottamaha River. Stormy weather hurt the odds of anyone catching much, but excitement builds as Ricky DeLoach pulls his flathead catfish in to be weighed. At close to 43 pounds, this fish is worth $10,000. But flatheads can easily weigh 60, 70, even 80 pounds. Here's the irony. Not far from the Ottamaha, on the Satilla River, Tim Bonvecchio with the Department of Natural Resources spends months each year trying to get rid of this fish. The goal today is to knock out as many flatheads as possible.
These fish are not discriminatory. They'll eat just about anything. We have even found an Atlantic sturgeon in the belly of a flathead catfish. So they're vacuum cleaners. They're piscivorous, and they'll eat just about anything.
There is a shock boat which sends a mild electric current into the water and temporarily stuns fish. A pickup boat follows to nab any flatheads that float to the top.
It looks like a white cat.
The native white catfish looks similar to the flathead, but their eating habits set them apart.
From a biology standpoint, their feeding habits differ considerably. This fish is piscivorous and this guy is omnivorous. In other words, he eats a lot of, his diet consumes a lot of things other than fish. He's more diverse, and you know, from an invasive standpoint, that's a bad story to tell because, exactly.
In a 5-year period, they removed more than 24,000 flathead catfish from the Satilla River.
The Satilla is basically our best river in the state for red-breast sunfish fishing, and so that's what this project is all about, is protecting the native fish on the river. In about 2000, we noticed declines in the redbreast and all of our sunfish populations on the river, with a rapid increase in the number and size of flathead catfish in the river as they expanded throughout the river.
Plants are also invaders. Malcolm Hodges with the Nature Conservancy takes us to a forest that looks more like an Asian landscape than one in middle Georgia. Oriental bittersweet is beautiful, but it doesn't belong here.
The characteristic of the Oriental bittersweet is that it produces, a cluster of fruits, a small cluster of fruits at every leaf axil. So it's just very prolific. It's a really tough vine. It wraps around things. It goes up and just weighs down the tree. Trees can fall over as a result of a bad infestation of Oriental bittersweet. Just from the very weight of it. Yeah, the limbs get ripped off of the tree.
Sounds unreal, but then we climbed over a pine tree, covered with bittersweet vine as thick as my arm.
So this was a bittersweet vine at one time.
Yes, this was a major bittersweet vine that was, weighing down this big pine and maybe contributed to its fall. The tree pulled it down with it, and now it's dead as well. But it's covered with young bittersweet, so.
It'll keep going, but the tree won't.
Yep.
This is like a walk down invasive lane. An exotic known as air potato, for obvious reasons. Invasive grasses, Chinese privet, mimosas. Many of them plants we buy at a nursery and put in our yards.
But there are people who would say, Malcolm, it's pretty, so why not? I like this in my yard, or I like to see this in the forest, it's pretty.
Well, I'm in the business of conserving native biodiversity. So to me, this creates a problem. It's crowding out that native diversity and it's replacing it with non-native diversity. It simplifies the system. It makes managing forests more difficult. You could lose, like I say, the entire canopy, and then you don't even have a forest anymore. It's utterly transformed the landscape.
You're right, just looking up at the canopy, I see so many invasive vines.
Some of the mimosas here are really big. They've sort of become a part of the canopy.
And when most of the plants change in an ecosystem, the wildlife can be impacted as well. What's happening in North Georgia is a good example. Wildlife biologist Jim Wentworth is part of a huge effort to save the hemlock tree. A tiny bug is changing the face of the mountains.
The hemlock woolly adelgid is an insect that's native to southern Japan that was introduced to the East Coast on nursery stock back in the 1950s in the Richmond, Virginia area. And then subsequently it spread into the Appalachians and moved north and south, reaching North Georgia in about 2002.
There are chemicals that can be used to save individual stands, but that method can't save the entire Chattahoochee National Forest.
It's a little aphid-like insect, and basically they attach onto the individual needles of the hemlock and suck the fluid out of the hemlock needles, drying them out, and eventually the needles drop off. And as the hemlock loses enough needles, it gradually declines, and after a period of 3 to 5 years, eventually the hemlocks will completely die basically from defoliation.
And as hemlocks die along the northern streams and rivers, the fish and other critters that live in the water can be impacted as well. Ralph Arteglair with Trout Unlimited is equally concerned about the hemlocks.
The importance for a cold water fishery, and what makes it a good fishery, is that you have to have cold, clean water, because above 70 degrees, trout have a problem. So in the upper mountains with shade, or on rivers like the Toccoa or the Chattahoochee, when you have trees along the banks, that helps to keep the water cool enough for the trout to summer over. So it's an important aspect. If the hemlocks go, then the shade for those small mountain streams are going to be altered. And if that's altered, then it's going to hurt. I mean, you can put stress on the system, and you can actually destroy a system by changing the shade element that you have.
That's one of the characteristic trees of the North Georgia mountains is the hemlock, and that's why there's so much concern and so much effort on a lot of people's parts to try to save them. They're one of those trees again that are found along a lot of our native streams, and so folks that come to camp and hike is something that is really adds to the beauty of North Georgia is the beautiful big hemlocks.
Invaders come in on crates with potting soil that we move to another place, wood taken from one state to another, on the boots of fishermen who don't clean their gear, or when pets are set loose without regard for what might happen when they reproduce. All of these battles being fought to protect native species. There is so much at stake, and from so many different sources.
From the Georgia coast to southern Florida, the Blue Ridge Mountains to my backyard, wildlife biologists agree invasive species are a major problem, and education could be the best weapon. Whoever planted this bamboo may have had second thoughts if they knew I have to dig it up at least 3 times a year or it would completely take over. I'm Sharon Collins. We'll see you next time.
Funding for Georgia Outdoors has been made possible in part by grants from the Georgia Natural Resources Foundation, from the Imlay Foundation, and from viewers like you.